Now we'll move on to the third part of this class, where we will basically develop a critique of the post-material hypothesis. The global spread of environmental movement, especially the intense rise of environmental movements in the global south or in the developing societies or in the third world countries, has significantly challenged the post-material ideas. The idea that environmental movement is a post-material luxury, the idea that environmental movement becomes possible only when society shifts to a post-industrial context, they are significantly criticized, or they are rejected by the empirical existence, by the empirical reality of environmental movements in the global south. So therefore, the growing evidence from the developing countries, the growing evidence of environmental movements in the developing countries rejects the post-material hypothesis and the idea that environmental concerns or environmental movements are a post-material luxury which the people in the third world cannot afford. So these movements or these empirical evidences have proved it that environmental movements is a global phenomenon. They are a global movements, and it is not necessary that only post-industrial societies can generate environmental movement, or it is not necessary that post-materialism is associated with environmental concerns. Stephen Brechin and William Crampton had provided a critique to the post-material hypothesis and have identified 5 factors which counts for emergence of environmentalism in the global south, because it is quite obvious that these societies in the global south are in the process of industrialization, they are in the process of their industrialization process, or they are in the middle of the industrialization process, and you may find a lot of environmental movements taking place in this region. So then how do we justify these factors? How do we justify that a society which has not achieved post-industrial status, which is still in the industrial context or in the industrial phase, but at the same time we find environmental movements here, we find environmental concerns here, we find ideas for environmental preservation here. So in that context, Brechin and Crampton say that there are 5 important factors which counts for global spread of environmentalism, and post-materialism or cultural shift toward post-material ideas may not be considered as a factor for emergence of environmentalism. So these 5 factors identified by Brechin and Crampton are the environmental justice and social protest, mass media and the diffusion of environmental values and ideas, direct observation of environmental degradation, institutional processes, and new conceptualization of environmentalism. Let us consider these 5 factors which stand as a criticism, stand as a critique to environmentalism, or stand as a critique to post-material environmentalism, and which points out the global spread of environmentalism to the southern countries or to the developing societies of the third world. Brechin and Crampton mention that in the third world societies, environmental movements may be considered as a continuation of a larger struggle or larger conflict over micro levels of domination and social resistance. So in that sense, concern for nature or ideas for nature preservation becomes a part of a larger movement, becomes a part of the larger movement which exists at the macro level with regard to domination and social resistance. So these environmental protests are derived from defending traditional methods of resource management, preserving local control over access to essential resources, fighting to maintain ecologically sound resource use pattern, and experiencing a visible environmental degradation and resulting insecurities in livelihood, or resulting deterioration of living conditions. So in that sense, environmental movements in the global south are not because of societal transfer, societal shift to that of a post-industrial context. While society is still in the industrial context, still in the process of industrialization, we find environmental movements here, but these environmental movements may be considered as part of a larger struggle, as a part of a larger conflict for struggle over resources, for domination and resistance over resources. So these struggles are struggles for better resource management. These struggles are conflicts for, or these environmental movements are struggle for ensuring local control over resources. As I just pointed out, that environmental movements in the global south are conflicts of locality against that of national sovereignty, where the local or the community wants to preserve, wants to protect its rights over the resource, its rights over the natural resources. So therefore, sometimes environmental movements in the global south emerge as a conflict between local control over resources versus the control by the state. So therefore, sometimes these movements pit these movements position the local community against that of the state, where the local community wants to have its share over the resource, local community wants to have its control over resource management, and the state wants to capture that resource, or the capitalist state wants to capture that resource for capitalist development or for the development process. So in that sense, environmental movements in the global south should be considered as a part of the larger struggle for control over the resource. So therefore, post-material ideas doesn't figure prominently here. Post-material ideas doesn't emerge important here. What is important to understand environmental movements or the global spread of environmental movements in the southern countries or in the developing countries is to understand that these movements are a continuation of a larger struggle. These movements are movements for control over or local control over resource management or local control over resources. The second factor which emerges as a factor for global spread of environmentalism in the third world societies is due to the media construction of environment or diffusion through mass media. In these societies, mass media, including the print media and the audiovisual media, they have played a great role in constructing a narrative for environment. So now environmental factors becomes a part of our daily life through newspapers, through TV, through magazines, through journals, or through popular conceptions or through popular constructions. So therefore, media diffuses environmental values, not just material products. While we see a lot of advertisements in TV, we find a lot of advertisements about consumer goods, about commercial products, but at the same time, media also plays a role in diffusing the idea for nature preservation. Media also plays a role in diffusing the idea for conservation of nature. Besides, the growing urbanization in these societies or the growing mass education, growing literacy in these societies also may be considered another factor for emergence and spread of ideas of environmental concern in this society. So therefore, the point that Brechin and Crampton tries to argue that while being at the industrialization process, while still being in the material context, these societies have significantly or successfully producing environmental movements or producing environmental mobilizations because of its diffusion through mass media, diffusion through urban culture, diffusion through education, and diffusion through popular media. It is the media construction of environment, it is the media construction of environmental problems as crisis that has resulted in greater awareness about nature, that has resulted in greater or a spread of greater concerns about nature. The third factor that Brechin and Crampton identify as causes of emergence of environmental ideas in the global south or global spread of environmentalism is that of observation of direct observation of environmental problems. Unlike in the global north, where, as I told, there is a separation between human society and that of nature, or the human scape and the nature scape, in the global south we find that human society and nature are intrinsically related. There is a close proximity between human society and nature. Sometimes people stay with nature, sometimes communities reside inside the nature. So therefore, there is a great visible exposure towards resource degradation. When there is a degradation of resource, people see it, people feel it, people experience it through direct observation. Unlike in the global north, where ideas about environmental degradation or comes through media or comes through certain secondary processes, here in the global south, environmental degradation is experienced directly. Environmental degradation is observed directly. So therefore, unlike those environmental problems like climate change, like ozone depletion, which you cannot directly observe that, which you cannot directly see environmental problems in the global south are more directly observable. Say for example, problems of water scarcity, problems of deforestation, problems of desertification, problems of loss of topsoil. These are some of the environmental problems which third world societies or people in the third world observe directly. So it is this direct exposure to environmental problems, it is this direct physical confrontation to environmental problems that has created a consciousness for nature, that has created environmental ideas, or that has created ideas for preservation of nature. So even though society is still in the industrialization process, it is the direct observance, it is this direct exposure to environmental problems that has created an environmental consciousness and environmental awareness in the third world societies. So what the point that Brechin and Crimpton tries to argue, that it is not post-material values which is producing collective mobilization for nature, but direct observation, direct experience of environmental degradation that is producing collective mobilization for environment in these societies. The fourth point that Brechin and Crimpton highlight is that of global institutional processes. The point that Brechin and Crimpton fundamentally disagree is the logic of succession through stages. Brechin and Crimpton fundamentally reject that the logic of succession through stages doesn't apply in emergence of environmental movements, in the sense that society will be traditional, then it will become modern, from which it will become postmodern, or from agrarian it will become industrial, and then it will become post-industrial, and environmental movement will emerge only in this post-industrial context. So the point that Brechin and Crimpton tries to argue, that environmental concerns can emerge even during the process of industrialization, can emerge in a material context. A society need not wait to become post-industrial to generate a collective mobilization for nature. Then how does that take place? How a society can generate collective mobilization while during the process of industrialization? Brechin and Crimpton say that happens in the global south because of certain international or because of certain global institutional processes. So therefore concepts and norms which acquire or which acquire social currency among the important institutions diffuse across nations regarding the nation's developmental stage. It doesn't matter which stage of development the country is in, which stage of development the society is in. The society may be in a material context, the society may be in the process of industrialization phase, but still there is possibility that environmental movement will emerge in these societies because of mediation, because of communication through certain formal environmental organizations. So in that sense, Brechin and Crimpton are pointing towards green politics, they are pointing towards environmental international NGOs which propagate environmental consciousness in these societies. So therefore important institutional processes or important global formal institutions like the Greenpeace, like the Friends of the Earth, like Worldwide Fund for Nature, like UNDP or UNEP, United Nations Development Program, United Nations Environmental Program. These global organizations will play an important role in diffusing environmental ideas to this global south. So therefore it doesn't matter which stage of development they are. It doesn't matter whether they are material or post-material. These global organizations will pass through, these global organizations will diffuse environmental ideas to these countries. So therefore a country's level of development, a country's level of progress doesn't matter or in no way connected with the idea of environmental protection. A country may be at a lower level of economic growth, maybe at the beginning of economic growth, but still the presence of these international institutions, the presence of these international formal organizations will play an important role in diffusing environmental consciousness to these third world societies. So therefore in that sense the global international organizations, so in that sense the formal international organizations or environmental NGOs, environmental civil society, they play an important role in diffusing environmental consciousness even to the poor societies or even to the third world societies. The fifth and the last factor that Brechin and Crimpton identify, which puts a befitting response to that of the idea of post-materialism, is the changing notion, changing conceptualization of environmentalism. Brechin and Crimpton identify that the concept of environmentalism, the term environmentalism has got a new connotation, it has got a new meaning with this global spread of environmentalism. That in the context of global north, when environmentalism was associated with the post-material hypothesis, environmentalism has a different meaning. Environmentalism meant better quality of life, environmentalism meant a luxury which only the rich can afford. But whereas when environmentalism spread to the global south, or with the global spread of environmentalism, or with the emergence of environmental collective mobilization in the global south, the concept of environmentalism has got new connotation, it has got a new meaning. So rather than being a post-industrial luxury, a healthy environment is now being widely viewed as essential for sound economic base. So it is not that it is not that only for a better quality of life that you need a better environment. Even during the process of industrialization, for ensuring economic growth, you need a better environment. Especially the notions of sustainability or the concept of sustainable development has redefined, has given a new meaning, new conceptualization to that of environmentalism. That now environmentalism is not considered something which is a quality of life issue, is not considered something which is more of a cultural concern, but environmentalism is considered as a material context. You need a better environment to ensure that economic growth takes place. So especially concept of sustainable development has popularized the idea that for better economic growth or for ensuring economic growth, we should ensure that our nature is conserved, that our nature is preserved. So therefore people want economic prosperity without sacrificing or without wanting to sacrifice their health and the economic growth or economic conditions of the present as well as the future generation. So therefore the concept of sustainability and sustainable development has given new meaning to that of environmentalism. That environmentalism is not just about quality of life issue. Environmentalism is not a post-material issue. Environmentalism or ideas about nature protection, ideas about environmental protection is a very material issue. Without conserving the nature, without preserving the nature, you cannot carry out economic growth. In that sense, the fundamental idea which post-materialism hypothesis was trying to portray, the contradictory dichotomy between environment and economic growth, are somehow now being nullified, are now somehow being rejected. That economic growth and environmental protection should go simultaneously. They are interrelated. You cannot have economic growth if you do not have environment, if you do not have a better environment. So therefore it is not that economic growth and environmental degradation are mutually opposed or mutually opposite to each other, but there has to be a synergy between them. So and that became possible only with the concept of sustainable development. So sustainable development tried to point out a new meaning for environmentalism. Now let me conclude this module with two examples of environmental movements, one from the American context and one from the Indian context, which will clarify our distinction between fundamental differences between the environmentalism in the north and environmentalism of the south. The two cases that I would like to discuss is Save the Stanislaus movement in California and Save the Narmada movement in India. Save the Stanislaus movement in America was a movement over construction of a dam in the Stanislaus River by the Friends of the River, which was headed by the Mark Du Bois. Likewise, Save the Narmada movement or the Narmada Bachao Andolan was a movement over construction of a dam in the river Narmada, which was supported by several submerged villages. In the American case, or in the American environmental movement, the dam was constructed and it was completed in 1978, and in 1979 the reservoir was full with water, and in the year 1979 Mark Du Bois, or the leader of the movement, chained himself with a stone and went inside the water. Likewise, in the year 1993, Medha Patkar, the leader of the Narmada Bachao Andolan, declared to drown herself in the water. So therefore there are a lot of similarities and differences in these two movements. Both the movements reflect the underlying ideologies of environmentalism in their respective context. The method of protest perhaps was the same, that in the both cases the protagonist or the leader of the environmental movement was trying to put certain moral pressure on the state by threatening to take their lives. In the case of Save the Stanislaus River, Mark Du Bois wanted to put a moral pressure on the American state that he is going to end his life for the sake of the nature, and in the Indian case Medha Patkar was trying to put a pressure on the state by declaring that she will drown herself inside the water. But there is a lot of differences between these two movements. Perhaps there are similar in strategies but difference in their underlying motivation. In the American case, Du Bois was trying to save the Stanislaus River and its wilderness. The fundamental reason behind Save the Stanislaus River in America was to protect the river, was to protect the cherished habitat, was to protect the pristine nature, was to protect the beauty of the nature. Whereas in the case of Narmada, it was a movement to protect the lives and livelihoods of the people. In the American context, Mark Dubais writes that all the life on the Canyon, its wealth, its archaeological and historical roots, and its unique geographical, its unique geological grandeur are enough reason to protect the canyon just for itself. In other words, the beauty of the nature, the contributions of the nature are enough reasons to fight for preservation of nature. But in contrast to the Indian case, in the Indian case of Narmada Bachao Andolan, the Medapatka was striving not only to save the river, even though the movement is known as Save the Narmada movement or Narmada Bachao Andolan, the movement was not essentially to save, to protect and preserve the cherished habitat. It was not just a movement to preserve the pristine nature or the beauty of the river. Instead, it was a profoundly significant movement to save the lives of the thousands of the people who are supposed to be submerged because of dam construction. In that sense, these two movements portray the fundamental differences in ideologies of environmentalism of the North and environmentalism of the South. The American example that I gave portrays the idea that environmental protection or ideas for preservation of nature is for beauty of the nature, is for the ecological contributions of the nature. So it is a call for a different attitude towards nature. It is a call for an ethical attitude toward the nature. Whereas in Indian context, it is a conflict between two groups of people having distinctively separate ideas and interests. So in that sense, Narmada Bachao Andolan or Narmada Save the Narmada movement, in that sense, Save the Narmada movement becomes a conflict between people in the context of nature. Whereas in the American context, it becomes a movement for a better life. It becomes a movement for a better quality of life. So therefore, we may conclude that environmentalism, which emerged in the industrialized countries context, which emerged, or environmental movement which emerged in the American context or in the global North, have now spread across the globe, and environmentalism has emerged as a global ideology which has significantly influenced collective mobilization at the global scale for preservation and protect of nature.